Hey guys, Morgan the Rebellious Reviewer. We talk about music, books, movies, shows, and video games. And today we're gonna be doing my June 2022 reading wrap-up. So, before we get started, let me tell you about my new rating system. Basically, it's an 11-point scale, just like my old one. But the difference is that instead of just giving out numbers, I'm going to have it use different variations of a thumbs up and thumbs down, and also a couple barnyard animals. For the 0, instead of a 0, I'm going to be giving out a donkey, because, it's ass. And then for 1, I'm going to be giving 2 thumbs down and blowing a raspberry. And then it's going to be double thumbs down without the raspberry, single thumbs down, hesitant thumbs down, hesitant thumbs up, double thumbs up, and a cheer, and a goat, which stands for greatest of all time. With that out of the way, let's talk about books. As you saw in my last reading vlog, June was a pretty good reading month for me. I read 7 books. They're all stacked right here, if I can keep them from falling, that is. Hang on. Yeah, not only did I read a lot of books, they were all really good. Even the worst one was like a 7 out of 10, or a single thumbs up, or I should say. So, let's talk about them. The first book I read was Around the World in 80 Days by Jules Verne. This book is great. Basically, it follows this English gentleman named Phileas Fogg, who makes a bet with his friends that he can go around the world in 80 days using 1800s transportation. And let's just say he comes across all kinds of grand adventures and risks his life a couple times in the process. And he even gets trailed by a detective who thinks he's a bank robber. So yeah. It's actually a pretty fun adventure, and what I really liked about this were the characters. Namely, the fact that Phileas Fogg is incredibly eccentric, yet also incredibly believable. He has he's also extremely attractive to me, not gonna lie. I kinda have a crush on him. Just because, on one hand, he's a gentleman. On the other hand, he does some things that would be considered bad boyish, I guess. So he's got 2 sides to him, and he's also super unemotional, but there are moments where he does show emotion and kind of goes against the stoic image. I kind of like that. He has hidden depths. And the other characters are also really cool, like his servant, Passepartout, is a lot of fun to follow, even if he is kind of an idiot. And he also makes a very nice contrast to Phileas, personality-wise. And then there's this detective named Fix who thinks Phileas Fogg is a bank robber and trails him all around the world. He's kind of a slime ball, but his motives are noble enough that I can kind of appreciate him in spite of that. And then there's this woman whose name I can't pronounce. I think it's like Aouda or something like that. I'll put it up on screen. And she's quite the colorful character herself. She is very submissive, as are most women in books written in the 1800s, written by men. But there is a moment where she actually gets into a gunfight, which kind of breaks against the neutral female stereotype that was so common back then. So I appreciated her for that. However, the one problem with this book is the obvious racism. Like, there's a part where people from Papua New Guinea are called the lowest scale of humanity. And then there's another part where Native Americans are treated like a bunch of savages. Like, yeah, there's some dated stuff in here. However, it was just too enjoyable for me to hate. It's like my ultimate guilty pleasure book. But seriously, if it wasn't for the obvious racism, this book would be a 10 out of 10. Or should I say a GOAT. I'm still getting used to the new rating system, guys. But as it is, I give it a double thumbs up. The next book I read is The Test by Sylvain Neuvel. This book is a dystopian novella based around the British citizenship test. And I'm not going to go too much into detail on the plot of this one because there are a lot of plot twists in this book, and I don't want to spoil any of them. But let's just say that this is a dystopian that a fan of like thrillers would probably enjoy, just because it has so many plot twists and a great suspenseful atmosphere. I also really like the characters in this one. They're kind of morally gray. And they have to make some very tough decisions, which makes me sympathize with them. So, yeah. My one complaint about it is that some of the technical psychology type stuff drags a little bit. But other than that, this book is amazing. I give it 2 thumbs up and a cheer! Woohoo! Up next, we have another classic, that being The Island of Dr Moreau by H.G. Wells. Yeah, we're bringing up H.G. Wells and Jules Verne both in one video. But here we are. This book is really, really, really dark. It's basically the story of a guy who ends up on this island inhabited by a mad doctor named Dr. Moreau, who turns animals into humans through vivisection. And he does this with no anesthetics, which makes it very disturbing in its own way. However, this book is also way smarter than it has any right to be. Like, seriously. It's basically about how, way deep down, humans are just animals, and it also touches on themes of whether animal vivisection is actually moral or not, whether doing things like that to a non-consenting victim is moral at all. And the great thing about it is that with debates on things like cloning and transhumanism, this could still be considered relevant today. And by the way, I also covered this in my previous book-related video that I did over a year ago, but don't watch that. It's horrible. However, I wanted to cover it again just because I figured I could do it a bit more justice, and also because I've changed my rating on it. The one problem I do have with it is that the characters, especially the main character, make some really dumb decisions. Like, I wanted to punch this guy. along with Dr. Moreau and his sidekick. But anyway, I still give this 2 thumbs up. Woohoo! And a cheer. And speaking of H.G. Wells, we now come to the books that I read for the readathon I did earlier last month. Starting with The First Men in the Moon by H.G. Wells. So yeah, more H.G. Wells. And this was also pretty dark by science fiction standards. It tells the story of 2 guys who go to the moon, and they discover this race of alien creatures that they call Selenites or Moonies. And they basically look like giant ants, is how they're described. And the characters are really, really unlikable in this book, too. Like, seriously, our main character ends up killing a bunch of moon people just on impulse because he's afraid of them. And the other character is a bit of an idiot, to say the least. But both of their motivations were understandable enough for me to kind of sympathize with them, even though I don't agree with either of them. And again, these characters are morally ambiguous. I like morally ambiguous characters, but if you don't, you'll probably hate this. And again, this book is way smarter than it needed to be. Like, it asks some philosophical questions about the human nature and why we kill each other. And I also like how H.G. Wells pokes a bit of fun at his own writing style by revealing the protagonist to basically be him, using a pen name. And yeah, but my one problem with this is the last few chapters, excluding the final one, bored me to tears. Like, it just goes into detail about how the Selenites live, and it's super technical and dry, and it's like, okay, I don't need to know everything about how the Selenites live, you can stop at any time. Still, that last chapter makes up for a lot, so I'll give it a single thumbs up, if a light one. Up next, we have That Was Then, This Is Now by S.E. Hinton. And this is an interesting one. It's written by the author of The Outsiders, one of my favorite books of all time. And let's just say that this is a lot darker than The Outsiders. It basically tells the story of these 2 guys named Brian and Mark who both grew up on the wrong side of town in the 1960s. And it describes some of their exploits. I can't describe the plot too much because it's a very character-driven story, but luckily Brian and Mark are both interesting characters. They're both kind of morally ambiguous, as are a lot of the characters in the stories I read this month for some reason. But what I liked about them is that they both have understandable motives. Brian is mostly a nice guy who just happens to have some slightly backwards attitudes due to his upbringing. And then there's Mark, who is definitely a scumbag, but you can also understand why he's a scumbag. So they're like 2 sides of the same coin, basically. And also, I like how this book contains callbacks to The Outsiders, like having Ponyboy be a character. And Tim Shepard also makes an appearance, so that's pretty cool. The one problem I have with this is that I think S.E. Hinton's view of drugs is a bit over-exaggerated. Like Like there's a part of this book where smoking weed is treated as a gateway drug, which is stupid. And and also there's parts where they condone locking people up for doing drugs and selling them, which I wouldn't mind that so much if it wasn't for the fact that S.E. Hinton has me siding with the sociopath who's selling drugs. I can't say too much without spoiling it, but yeah, it makes me cringe a little bit. Other than that, I enjoyed it. Double thumbs up, woohoo, and a cheer. Up next, we have The Magician's Nephew by C.S. Lewis. This is the first book in the Chronicles of Narnia series. I read this when I was a kid, and I really enjoyed it then, and I'm pleased to say that I think I still enjoy it as an adult. Basically, this book tells the story of these two kids named Diggory and Polly who go into Narnia, or are tricked into going into Narnia, and they end up bringing an evil witch with them. And they have to go on this quest to stop her from ruining Narnia. So, it's a classic children's fantasy in that respect. And what I really loved about this is that both of the main characters are likable, yet also believable, and I especially liked how the settings are described. Like, I can picture Narnia vividly in my head. I want to live in Narnia after reading this. However, this is yet another book with questionable political implications. Like, there's a part where our main character, Diggory, isn't allowed to get something to help his mother who's dying unless Aslan tells him he can. Like, come on! I know Aslan is supposed to be God and everything, but man, that's really authoritarian. Not being allowed to help your own mom unless an authority figure tells you can. That's a little messed up, in my opinion. And I get that C.S. Lewis was a monarchist, according to Wikipedia at least. But man, the authoritarianism is blatant. And before you say, "You're overthinking it, it's just a children's book," that's all the more reason for me to pay attention to the morality behind it. Because children are young and impressionable, meaning that they're more likely to be susceptible to being brainwashed into authoritarianism by these kind of messages. And before you say that kids don't pick up on that stuff, I think that's just insulting to young people to think that they're that stupid. Anyway, despite my criticisms of this book, I still really enjoyed it. It was a fun little middle grade fantasy. And I especially enjoyed it for the nostalgia, and the one quote that C.S. Lewis put in here that's 100% true. The problem with trying to make yourself stupider than you really are is that it very often works. So yeah, I give this a double thumbs up. Finally, we have Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. This is actually in a bundle with Dracula. I borrowed this from my dad, but I only read Frankenstein. I do plan on reading Dracula at some point. But Frankenstein is fantastic. I love how morally ambiguous the characters are, again, noticing a theme here. And throughout the book, it's unclear whether the monster is humanity or the creature they're all claiming is a monster, or both, or neither. And both do some pretty terrible things, but both of them have completely understandable motivations. And it really does make you think. My one problem with it is that it's a bit too slow-paced, which is not helped by the overly descriptive writing. And The plot and characters are enough to make me love this book, though, and I still think it's something special, so double thumbs up, yay, and a cheer. And that's all the books. Overall, I had a pretty good reading month. My average score is an 8.43. Again, pretty good. And that's my video. Don't forget to comment, like, and subscribe. I'm Morgan the Rebellious Reviewer, and I'm out.